Hi, I'm Tom Power, and this is Toy Heart, a podcast about bluegrass. Hi, welcome to the third episode of Toy Heart for the season. Thanks for all the kindness on the internet about the show so far. If you missed our conversation with Sam Bush or with Larry Sparks, you can find them wherever you got this podcast. And if you're not already subscribed, that would be great if you could do that. Leave a review too, if you don't mind. Today, you're going to hear from one of the great instrumentalists of bluegrass music. I first heard Mike Compton as part of the house band from the Down from the Mountain concert at the Ryman in Nashville. It was a DVD I got, a live celebration of the music of the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I bought the DVD at Fred's Records in Newfoundland. I think it's on YouTube now. I don't know if it's legally on YouTube now, but it's definitely on YouTube now. You can see it. I watched it with my dad, and there was this guy in overalls and long hair and a mandolin, and he kind of played with everybody. It didn't matter the band. He was up with them, and he had such a powerful way of playing the music. And I didn't quite understand what it was about the music that I loved, but I knew I loved it. It was only when I got older and frankly got nerdier did I learn who this guy was, that Mike Compton is one of the finest mandolin players in the history of the instrument. His playing hews really closely to the way Bill Monroe played the mandolin, and we talk a little bit about that. In the 80s, Mike helped start one of the greatest bands in the music, the Nashville Bluegrass Band. He played alongside the legendary John Hartford in his string band. He has some good John Hartford stories today. And he's kind of played with everybody in the music, with Sam Bush and Alison Krauss and Norman Blake and Elvis Costello and Sting and Doc Watson. You don't often hear Sting and Doc Watson in the same sentence. I'm a big fan of his duets records, too, with David Long and another with David Greer. They're both on Spotify. But overall, this is someone, and maybe this is a theme of this season of Toy Heart I'm starting to figure out, who approaches the music with heart instead of flash. We taped this conversation over Zoom in the summer of 2022 when Zoom was kind of the way to do it. Here's my conversation with Mike Compton. So I thought we could start at the beginning. So Meridian, Mississippi. Meridian?
Yep. Home of Jimmy Rogers.
You railroad bound, he slammed the boxcar door. Ole-ee, ee, ole-ee.
The home of Jimmy Rogers. Did you know that was the home of Jimmy Rogers growing up? Did that mean anything to you when you were a kid?
I don't think it meant anything to anybody. I found a monument to him out on the frontage road by one of the interstates that goes through Meridian. We went out to it because it was just something unusual. When I was late teens, just started getting interested in playing music and all this stuff, and my relatives and what had been going on around Meridian. This would have been late 60s, 1970, 72, around in there. His monument by the interstate must have been, it was put up before the interstate was built, but it must have been a reasonably nice little place, but it was all grown up in weeds at that point. I always heard about him, all the old time guys that I hung around with, which were mostly all the people I hung out with when I was a kid, were men my age now, mid 60s, 70s. They talked about him with great reverence, but nobody else knew about him. And I heard at one point really that not many people around Meridian were very fond of him because he had gotten a bad name by befriending bootleggers and then turning them into the cops. So they were all pissed.
That's a good way to lose some friends, though. You know what I mean? That's a good way to. Yeah, I get it. So your relatives, like you had some great grandparents who were fiddlers and played music. Is that right?
I had a great grandfather that my daddy's mother's family. He was a fiddle player, and turns out within the last 2 or 3 years, I have a distant relative named Tammy that lives in Texas that knows all of those. Those are all galleons. Not the Italian version of the galleons, but the Irish. All of the people in that branch of the family played something, and Tammy works for the state of Texas as a historian, and she sent me a whole package of information, like copies of photographs that go back to the Civil War and all kind of like newspaper clippings and everything else. Turns out there were a lot of pickers and singers in that bunch.
Yeah.
So I started tracking that down. I mean, but that was the branch of the family. The Comptons are all pretty much, most of them tone deaf, and and my mother's side of the family, the Weekses, they play some Moffats.
But there wasn't any picking growing up. There wasn't any in the living room playing tunes or anything like that.
No, I started playing because of the men that I was working around in the summertime. They were all string band musicians, and hauling hay and picking peas and all that kind of stuff. They all played mandolins and fiddles and guitars, and they were real fond of Narmer and Smith and Arthur Smith and the Leake County Revelers, Jimmy Rogers, and all of that stuff.
So were you playing guitar? You were playing rock and roll? Were you playing the Beatles? Like, were you doing that kind of thing?
My cousin and I, well, one of the Moffats, one of the ones that we fell in love with, like Creedence Clearwater and Cat Stevens and all those guys back when they first came out. And I think the first time I saw anybody playing a mandolin was on the Midnight Special on television. It was Seals and Crofts.
Yeah, Summer Breeze. He plays mandolin on there. Yeah.
Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. Summer breeze.
Although, oh, wow, that's cool. And then the soundtrack to Deliverance was out. I don't know how I came across that, but I ended up with a copy of it at some point and listened to that because it was different than all the Gordon Lightfoot and the B.J. Thomas and Smokey Robinson I was hearing on the radio.
So when did, like, is there a flashbulb moment? Is there a moment you hear Bill Monroe? Is there a moment? Can you pinpoint, like, I heard Bill Monroe one day on this, and then everything kind of changes?
Whenever I first heard Bill, I had grown up listening to my parents' record collection, which was as wide and varied as you could imagine. Herb Alpert, Tijuana Brass, Mitch Miller, Strauss, Ray Charles, Ella Fitzgerald, Hank Williams, Henry Mancini, all of those things. I used to lay on the floor with my head under the Magnifox stereo because that's where the speaker was, and it just blasted me in the face. That's what I was listening to. Whenever I first heard Bill, he sounded out of tune to me because he sang some things a little bit flat, and it didn't sound, like living room smooth kind of stuff, So I kind of had an aversion to it at first.
See that train coming around the bend, carrying the one that I love. Her beautiful body is still here on earth, but her soul has been called above.
And then I started hanging around these old guys that played hillbilly music and sort of developing a taste for it. And that's kind of whenever I started pursuing it.
That's not uncommon. Hey, I mean, that happened to me. I remember when I first started getting into this music, it was through a brother, actually, which we can talk about later. And then, like, and then I would start listening to a lot of different stuff. I would listen to a lot of really polished stuff. And so Bill Monroe is like, he's a very big deal to me. And I got the shirt, and I'm if it wasn't you, I would be nerding out a lot more about Bill Monroe. But and Neil Rosenberg, who's like my kind of mentor and has helped me with everything along the way.
Yeah.
He's talked to me a lot about working for Birch and working for Bill and all that stuff.
Oh my, bless his heart.
Yeah, you're right. And he, but I remember first hearing Bill Monroe and going, I don't like this. Like, this isn't smooth. This isn't cool. I don't even know if he's that good at the mandolin. You know what I mean? And Tim O'Brien told me he felt the same way. It
was just it sounded flat, and I couldn't make sense out of it based on, I didn't have a point of reference to listen to it because, like I said, everything else that I had been listening to was overproduced and really smooth and really in tune. And here came Bill just being real primal sounding and in my face, and it made me uncomfortable.
did you dig it eventually? Did you?
Yeah, I did. I started getting a taste for it and started, that thing that makes the hair go up on the back of your neck whenever you hear some of those things. I kind of started getting really a craving for that feeling, because it was starting to turn me on a bit, and I went and started buying records. I started listening to Delta Blues, Furry Lewis, and Son House.
I got a letter this morning, I do. You ring it red. You said, honey, gal, your love is dead. I got a letter this morning. How do you ring it red?
Robert Johnson, that project that came out that turned everybody on came out about that time too. I was in like midways through high school. All of that started hitting at the same time, and I got into it and just made a left at Albuquerque and went that, as Bugs Bunny says, and that's what I did from then on.
But you were looking for the heart, like I can tell even just then you weren't. That doesn't strike me as someone attracted to the flash or the chops. Like
no,
you were looking for the heart of this music.
It was compelling because it kind of grabbed a hold of me, and I got addicted to unapologetic sound pretty much.
I got addicted to unapologetic sound. That's something else, man. What does that mean? What talk to me more about that? It
means that I could hear the confidence level in it, and it was raw, and it was unapologetic. It's like, here it is. It felt honest, and it felt pure. Even if it had goobers, it was like trying to listen to an old 78 record with all the noise on it. After a while, you don't hear the noise. What you hear is the story that's being told.
So you weren't listening to Homer and Jethro or anything like that, and that kind of mandolin playing, or getting into anything like that?
No, I hadn't heard of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're brilliant players, but it's not something that I identify with so much. I think really the main part of Monroe's playing that gets me, besides his attitude, was the blues aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't really hear that in a lot of other country band sounds, unless it's like the black string band tradition. There's a really strong likeness between like Charlie McCoy and Bill Monroe, and Monroe was surrounded by black mandolin players and fiddlers, and he was one of his greatest examples and teachers, Arnold Schultz.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about him when I first heard it, but after I got studying on it, I realized where they were living. Everybody was playing the same music until the record companies came through and decided to cash in on all of that.
Yeah, that the famous story around Bristol, where just one day there's black music, up and
all of a sudden.
Yeah, one day there's black music and white music. One day there's R&B and country music. Literally earlier that day, everyone was playing the exact same music. So when you went to college for art?
Yeah, I went on an art scholarship. I entered a little contest. There was a couple of students that came around to the high school I was going to and were teaching everybody how to draw, and so I entered, and they gave me some money to go to school.
Painting?
A lot of it was freehand drawing. It was included. At the time, I didn't know it. I thought it would just be me sitting there drawing stuff, because I did that the whole time from the time I was in elementary school. I took painting classes and noodled and scribbled on stuff, basically drawing a pile of junk in the middle of the room in a freehand drawing class. It included pottery. It included architectural drawing, which I developed a fondness for, and all of those kinds of things. It was all included together. Not much painting. Most of it was freehand drawing, and everything that they had on the curriculum that went with it, including like English and math and all that stuff.
Is that where you were headed? Were you thinking, okay, I might get into art, or I might get into architecture, or that kind of thing?
I liked using pencils and rulers and French curves and all that kind of stuff. It turned me on a lot. I'm still that way. I like all the curves to have curves, not straight lines in them, and everything to be lined up. I'm sort of, I guess, at the core of what makes me who I am is sound and shapes. and colors. That's pretty much, if I was going to have to describe myself in 3 words, that's what it would be.
So are you having that moment in college that a lot of people have where there's just you're supposed to be doing classes, but there's some music happening, there's some jamming happening, there is some bluegrass in the world? Because it's like 75, you go to Bean Blossom, right?
74, I believe 74. Yeah, I graduated in 74. It was the year I graduated high school. But I had gone to some festivals in Georgia earlier on than that. Well, I guess the first time I ever talked to Monroe was in Livonia, Georgia, I believe.
Tell me about that. What happened there?
There was a kooky guy that was the only adult I knew that would get in a van with me and go to a festival. At that point in time, he had a Volkswagen van, and he volunteered to drive us down to Livonia, and so he took me and him down to this festival. And being a guy that talked to a lot of different kinds of people, he wasn't very shy about anything. And we were walking across the grounds one night down there, and so you saw Monroe walking across the grounds after getting done with the last show, carrying his mandolin case, and he ran out and says, Bill, I'd like for you to meet my friend Mike. He really enjoys your music. And so Bill just stopped, standing right there in the dark, and was like, well, what now? And I'm just standing there looking at him, and there was a street light right behind him. So basically, all I could see was a black silhouette of him. I couldn't see any facial features or nothing. It was just like cut out of Bill Monroe standing there, not saying a damn thing. And it's the guy I came with says, "Do you have anything you want to ask him, Mr. Monroe?" And I said, "Well, how do you tune your mandolin to play Get Up John?" Because I had just kind of discovered that. And he rattled off something. I have no idea what he said. But when he stopped talking, I said, "Okay, thank you." And I turned around and walked off.
Smooth.
But yeah, I was like, oh God. I was terribly, terribly shy as it was anyway. And he really put me on the spot. And I didn't know what to say, because that's the first thing that popped into my head, and so that's what I said.
So when you go to Bean Blossom, then after that, with Butch, right, with Butch Robbins and Julia LaBelle, is that right?
Julia LaBella,
yeah. But were they both playing with Monroe at the time?
No, Julia was Bill's girlfriend.
Yeah,
and
didn't she play some guitar or something like that? Did she
played some? Yeah, she had a real nice little Martin. Like singular 0017 or something that he had bought her. She played some with him.
Yeah.
I played Bean Blossom a couple of times with, do you remember a guy named Pete Coram?
No.
Was a bass player, played with Flat some, I think.
Okay.
Went up with him and Charlie Cushman and Pat Enright and myself, and we played some shows that Pete had booked. I think that was the first time I did that, but I played down actually at the Livonia Festival with Hubert Davis years ago. I moved to Nashville. I was in the middle of going to school, and I went up to Nashville with a fellow that lived there in Meridian. There's a upholstery guy named Raymond Huffmaster, and he had the only bluegrass band in town. And we drove up to Bean Blossom in 74 and did all of that festival. I think I got strep throat that year and didn't have a lot of fun, but that was the first year I went, and we stopped in Nashville on the way through. I believe the next year he went up to pick up a Randy Wood mandolin that he had bought, and we stopped to see Hubert, and I was introduced to them.
That's great music. I listened to that record yesterday. I listened to that one of those records you guys made together with Hubert. I listened to the Harvest record.
Yeah,
lovely stuff. And you're a kid on that, I know. And I was listening to your break on
Jesse James or something.
Yeah, Jesse James, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. You play a real lovely break on that.
Oh, Hubert learned to play banjo from Earl Scruggs while Earl was learning how to play. So I mean, he got it straight from the horse's mouth.
They were from around the same place?
Yeah, Earl was a little bit older than Hubert. Hubert was just, I don't know how many years younger, but he was basically the little kid that was following Earl around.
And he had a venue, right, in Nashville. He had a
Yeah, we played 2 or 3 different places there. But well, I was introduced to Hubert there, and I went to some other place and played. I don't remember where, but it was Pat Enright and a couple of other people were playing in there. And Monroe came in the venue that night when we were playing and sat out there and didn't say anything. He just kind of sat there, and I was just mortified that he was in the room. I came back to town, and not too long after that, Pat got in touch and said that they were starting a band. Would I want to move to Nashville and be part of a new bluegrass band? And I just thought, oh my Lord, what am I going to do about this?
Yeah, because that was the bluegrass band before the Nashville Bluegrass Band.
No,
right?
it was before that.
Okay, it wasn't the one with Butch. It was the one before that.
Yeah, it was a band that never materialized. Basically, it was about 1976 or 7. I moved here in 77.
Didn't Hubert die when you were did he pass on while you were playing with him?
No, afterwards, several years after I dropped out.
Oh, okay.
I hadn't lived there very long. I moved to Nashville and lived with J.T. Gray, the guy that used to run the station in, for months. And then I played with Hubert a little bit. And then one night Hubert said, the newest member, if he wants to be, and then introduced me that way, didn't ask me or anything. It just like put me on the spot, standing on stage. And so I moved in with Hubert and his family and started doing that. And I did it until sometime in 81.
Are you feeling at that moment like there's, not to be a bit too woo-woo with you here, but like, are you feeling like a sense of purpose? Like when you're playing in like a bluegrass band that's gigging, is something just feeling right? Because it's quite a decision that a young person makes, that they're going to play this kind of music and they're going to do it professionally. Are you feeling some kind of purpose there?
Oh, well, I don't know. I stopped going to school and just would put the mandolin in the car. I had decided in my mind that that's what I was going to do. And I used to just go drive off down to the dirt pit and play the mandolin all day and not go to school. When I moved to town, I didn't have any goals.
No.
And I dreamed of being able to play better. But, it was hang on for dear life the whole time I was working with Hubert until I got to where I felt like I could play a little bit. And then Pat Enright, Alan O'Brien's were started talking about maybe wanting to form a band, and that's when I played some with David Greer, starting around in that time, and played in a band with several folks around town that I knew, just doing odd job kind of stuff. And that's when the bluegrass band thing started happening, and it was Butch and Ed Dye and Pat and Alan and David Sebring. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not. This guy from Erie, Pennsylvania. Yeah. We basically did the last few gigs that the bluegrass band had on the books, and about 5 or 6, I guess. And then it was sort of like a proving ground. Pat and Alan had decided that it went well enough, and they just said, well, let's just start another band.
How quickly after that do you do that Grand Ole Country touring show?
That was about 84, 80, I think, 85.
So this is the Nashville Bluegrass Band. Because that feels like a formative moment for the band, right? It feels like the Beatles in Hamburg to me. Like it just feels like you guys are, it feels like you're going out on the road just touring and playing a lot. Minnie Pearl was on that, right?
Yeah, and everybody else was from New York City. There was a swing band, and well, except for Steve Young. Steve Young was on there. He's from Alabama.
What do you remember from that tour?
I remember that everybody had 2 bus seats each, and that's where you slept and where you sat. And basically, it was a proving ground for the new band. We were out 3 months, and we went out and did that whole thing, and we sort of had an identity when we came back. We all thought about, was Pat and Alan, myself, and Mark Hembry. We told Mark that there was going to be a new band, and did he want to join? And he quit Monroe on Father's Day to join this band. So that's what we did. And it worked out good. And so we decided, all right, this is working. Let's just keep doing it. We need to find a fiddle player.
When you say you came back with an identity, what do you mean by that?
The sound had started to gel, and we had material, and we felt like it was, we had a legitimate course of action that was sort of leading the troop, as it were.
and it felt different than a lot of other stuff that was happening at the time. I mean, the black gospel songs, the harmonies. I mean, that first record especially, like, it did feel different than when I listened to that first Nashville Bluegrass Band record, which I listened to them a bunch of the stuff to get ready for this today.
Yeah,
it just sounds so clearly defined to me.
Oh, ye prodigal son. Go ye prodigal son.
We didn't have to figure out what we wanted it to sound like, which was, I think, in and of itself, the largest hurdle we didn't have to jump. Mainly, we just had to start coming up with material because, Alan comes from a background of being around the Monroes. He worked for James. He filled in Monroe's band, Bill's band some. And Pat, he was the guy that's 10 years older than all of the rest of us. And really one of the main arrangers of the music and finding things that we could work on. Pat comes from like the 1950s R&B and doo-wop, back when FM radio had everything from Bill Monroe to Frank Sinatra on it. And, he was a wealth of information and influence there. But I mean, he liked Vern Williams from out in California and really, really raw music, which suited all of us just fine. Mark Henry had just come off of a stint working for Bill, and we used Blaine Sprouse a bit, which is, straight out of the Baker and Vassar book. And when we met Stuart Duncan, he was looking for some place to land, and boom. So you got people from as far east and west as you could go in the United States and as far north and south almost as you could go, and a guy right in the middle. So it just like it covered the entire United States as far as like where we were from, but we all thought about the sound that we wanted in the same way. So all we did was started working up material.
What did you bring? Like if Alan kind of brought that, working for the Monroes, and Pat had played with the Dreadful Snakes before that, and he had toured for a long time, and Stuart had already made those Allison records with Alison Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and and that was some of that stuff's way out there. What did you bring to the Nashville Bluegrass Band, you think? I know it's a hard one.
At this point in time, I would probably have to say that it was a fondness for the blues, and the Monroe element, Southern beat.
Yeah.
If I'm at home, if I'm hanging out with people in Meridian, then that where the downbeat is a little bit different. But Kentucky's not that far north. It's the kinfolks.
Tell me more about that. Where the downbeat is.
Oh, it's just it's like an accent. You and I both speak English, but we sound different.
Yeah.
It's just a different accent on where the beat's placed. Whenever Bill was playing with Charlie, they kind of the way they dealt with the beat was to me, it was a little bit on the front edge of it.
Darling, you can't love one. Darling, you can't love but one. Love but one and have any fun. No, darling, you can't love but one. Riding on a new river train. Riding on a new river train.
Bill liked to say that. He said, Charlie will run off and leave you if you don't watch him. Because he said he just played on the front of the beat so much. Bill had to teach himself how to play the chop that he played with. He didn't use it until really that I could tell him until after he left Charlie. And I think it was a Western swing influence. Everybody was sort of doing that at that point in time. And bluegrass is more of an offbeat music to me.
Yeah.
And, so Bill's was sort of like in the middle. But, if you listen to all of his material, I mean, this is the only way I could describe what I'm trying to tell you. If you listen to Bill's material, you know that he's ever present on the offbeat, but the offbeat is not always right exactly in the same place.
Right.
And but Robin says it's almost as if he had a specific rhythm for every song that he played. So it moves around just a little, or it's the way you attack it. It's a lot easier to get into it and melt back into it, the feel of it, when I'm with people that I grew up with.
Yeah.
Than it is for me to tell you how to do it.
No, I understand. And I can kind of hear it in the Nashville Bluegrass Band stuff a little bit. It is on the back end of that beat a little bit more. It's a little bit more sat back,
We didn't have to figure out where that was. Like I said, we all sort of felt it there.
Yeah.
And so we just started working up material and using our collective understanding of what we wanted to do.
It's funny, when I listen to, I know I'm going to sound like an old man yelling at clouds right now, but like when I hear a lot of new bluegrass, like when I listen to the Sirius channel or something like that, it's funny. I feel like it's all downbeat now. Like I feel like it's like gong, 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 and very little cha, cha, cha. You know what I mean?
It's a different pocket. And the only thing that I can attribute it to is the earlier music came with a lot of influence from fiddle bands. And, in the 50s, Elvis came around, and Monroe was against him playing one of his songs until he started getting a lot of money in the mail, and then he decided it was okay. Because he wasn't making diddly at that point in time. Hubert told me that he went to one of Bill's shows in the 50s with his brother Pee Wee, and there were about 9 people there, and half of them got up and left before Bill got finished, and stopped halfway back through the auditorium and waved at Bill and says, "Bye, Bill," and just went out the door. So Bill was on hard times until Elvis did Blue Moon, and then it was cool. It was okay. But after that, I think a lot of the music especially after the folk revival, or scare as they call it around here, after that, a lot of people were playing music that was being played on electric guitars.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's sort of a turning point. I don't, I'm no academic about it all, but that's just my opinion. It's sort of what I hear in it. It seems like it's more music that could be played on electric guitars it's not so much of a fiddle focus.
Yeah, that's always what I loved about the Nashville Bluegrass Band and your playing, and even just for a lot of the people we're talking to in this season, is that like those years where, and Jody Stecker calls it like the years where old time music and bluegrass music were kind of the same thing. They were kind of overlapping with one another. That was like coming from a fiddle tradition like I did. Like that's the stuff that got me into this music. That's the stuff that really kind of caught me.
Beside it being a generational thing, I mean, obviously the music is going to be in the culture one way or the other, and we're all learning from each other. The people around the time when Monroe was first getting into it, it was sketchy. You don't hear near as much stuff around as you do now. I mean, we're sitting here talking to each other on the internet. I could leave this interview and go find almost anything that I want to find anywhere in the world. They didn't have that. I think the mass, just the volume of things that are available to listen to is a wonderful thing, and it's a marvel. And I have reaped many benefits from being able to listen to all kinds of stuff and found a lot of things that I really enjoy, but it dilutes the sound. It brings new things to it, and it dilutes what came before it.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does change the accent.
I was thinking back to Monroe and Elvis. He gets the B-side of Elvis's single, like he gets Blue Moon of Kentucky.
Monroe was a rockabilly guy before Chuck Berry came along. I met Chuck one time when I was working with Hartford, and Hartford was walking around backstage at this thing that they had, mainly for Missouri artists, and we were all following him around. He was just walking around playing the fiddle and showing off in front of everybody, and we walked by and it's Chuck Berry and one of the guys in his band, and I went, holy crap, look who this is. And John went and stopped and just did this whole thing in Chuck's face, and he turned to the guy that was with him and he said, listen, man, they're playing bluegrass. So, so Chuck was hip, he knew what was going on. And as soon as he recognized him, John turned around and walked off, and we went and did something else. Monroe was doing that before a lot of those guys.
Oh yeah, you hear that in a lot. I want to go back to the Nashville Bluegrass Band for a second, and because I wanted to hear this story. I have a couple of stories about that band I've heard over the years that I wanted to ask you about. One is, can you tell me the story? Because the band starts blowing up pretty early. You guys start doing really well, and then you guys become big in China. Can you tell me that story? Like, you guys went over there and you had a hard time getting in or something like that, but then you became like the Beatles of bluegrass in China or something like that?
Well, I don't know. That's kind of far-fetched. When we got to the country, they wouldn't let us through customs because apparently our visas weren't filled out the right way or something. And we came through and got met by a group of Chinese guys in plain clothes. I had a guy came up and started talking to me, and I noticed after about 5 minutes that everybody in the band had been quietly herded off away from each other. So I started looking around, and there was no way I would have been able to make contact with any of the rest of them, because they had separated us without us realizing it. And I was talking to a guy about different things, and I looked, and there's Mark over there about 30 feet away talking to another guy. Pat was over there, and Alan was back here. It's like we were all separated. That I went, uh-oh, this doesn't look good. And somehow or another, they said, all right, well, you claim to be singers, sing something for us. And fortunately, we had just worked up a few of those black gospel songs, and we walked over, and Alan kicked off Blind Bartimaeus, and we started singing 5 parts.
Oh, well, oh, blind Bartimaeus stood on the way, blind Bartimaeus stood on the way. Well, oh, blind Bartimaeus stood on the way, cried, oh, Lord, have mercy on me. Well, oh, blind Bartimaeus stood on the way, blind.
And then they started stamping the visas, and then we went right on in. But I mean, they had separated us and had us right where they wanted us until we proved that what we were saying was true.
Crazy.
And then they let us in.
And then when you get in, you start doing really well. Like the band, the people are into it, right? Like,
yeah, we ended up meeting a bunch of guys that was working in the hotel that had a band room that was designated for them to do what they wanted to do, down about 5 floors below the ground in a parking garage. And we got hanging out with them. We got to play for the China Daily, which is a newspaper there, and played for a bunch of kids and had a humongous multi-course dinner. And we played a lot in the big hotel there in town, like foreign dignitaries and people hanging out. But it was cool. I was like, we went to the Forbidden City, and before it was really cool to do so. And it was a pretty psychedelic kind of a trip.
Man, oh man, like it really feels like everything's kind of happening. It must have been so exciting to be in the band at this stage.
It just took off like a rocket. And so I get really no fault of our own. We started a band, and we had to scrounge around for quite a while trying to find somebody that would book us, and that wasn't doing all that good. And whenever it started, I guess it just kind of took off. And then the agency people were, coming around and said, hey, we'd like to be your exclusive.
If you guys are sort of here, right, then there's like the really traditional kind of dressed up in costume Johnson Mountain Boys. And then there's like the Newgrass Revival guys. Like, what was your relationship with those two bands, or those two sides of the music with the band?
It was all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we knew all of those guys.
Yeah.
No, it was fine. We just decided that we didn't need to do that traditional everybody dress alike thing. Yeah. I mean, we understood the reason for it.
Yeah.
Because it tells everybody that you're a unit. But we all felt like we had individual identities, although that we were working in a company that had a product. This is us. But somebody's already doing that, and somebody's already doing this. So what? Well, let's show up nice, casual, or however you want to do it.
How soon after Merle Watson's passing did Doc get in touch with you guys to do the Merle Watson Festival and to do the gospel set?
NBB, up until Doc died, worked every one of them.
That's right.
From the beginning. Doc was really fond of Alan's tenor singing and knew Alan's voice and was acquainted with Alan before the band started, I think. I'm not really sure about that, but I do know that we went and did some parts on one of Doc's records early on. But I mean, NBB did every one of those festivals from the get-go.
Yeah, I guess that would have been pretty quickly after Merle had died.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that, you know.
Up until the year Doc, actually, the year that Doc died, that was the last year that we played it. I think the reason we were there was because Doc enjoyed doing that Sunday gospel thing with us, and you know, so that was why we were there.
I am really curious about what happened with the bus accident. I've always been really curious about it. I've only ever heard it from other people. And as far as I understand it, you guys were on your way to Winterhawk, which is now Gray Fox.
Mm-hmm. We had stopped. We were in Virginia. We had stopped to get something to eat and took off down the road in the bus. Mark was driving. It was his shift. And it was raining a little bit on the road. We came over the hill, and I think it was going pretty slow because, you know, it was an old bus and it's hilly going up and down. We came up the crest of the top of the hill, and there was nothing but brake lights on both lanes. And because of that countryside around there, it's up and down and windy, and you know, looks like the road is built on almost like on a platform the whole way through the thing, and there was no place to go on either side because the banks just dropped off and go down a hill. It was at the bottom of the hill. We crested the top of the hill, and all we could see down at the other end were cars stopping. And I just remember Mark saying, "Oh shit!" And we all kind of stood up and went like this and started like ooh, and this is going to be bad. And he basically just guided the bus into the back of a semi because that was the biggest thing there. And instead of, he had the presence of mind to not plow into a bunch of cars.
Wow.
Because that would have hurt a lot of people. There was a semi there, and he just turned the bus. He got in that lane and just ran us into the back of that semi. He slowed down as much as he could, but I could feel every time he would mash on the brakes, they'd lock up and the bus would slide. So he just kind of did, you know, Mark being from Milwaukee, he started doing it like you would if you were driving in snow. You just kind of patting the brakes, trying to get it slowed down. And I remember we're all sitting up there watching the back of that truck coming up on us, and it got darker and darker and then black, and then it was like blam, a huge, and everything in the bus came to the front.
Were you okay?
Yeah, I was sitting up playing the mandolin, and it grabbed the mandolin headstock on the windowsill and ripped the headstock off of it. Pat was in the back taking a nap, so whenever, and Stuart and Alan were sitting on the other side on the couch, which went to the front too. Mark got the worst of it because there's nothing in the front of the bus but a huge piece of glass for a windshield, and there's nothing, you know, in between him and the back of the truck but the steering wheel and the dashboard. So he got the full frontal bit of it.
That must have been terrifying, man.
It all happened so quick. It felt like it went in slow motion. It really did. I know people say that, but that's what it felt like. It felt like whenever we could see that there was no way we were going to be able to stop it, time just kind of got real funny.
Yeah.
and it went blam and hit that bus. And once we all kind of like felt around and made sure that we were all together, I went in the back and pushed the back door open. Everything, all the clothes and instruments and everything were up against the door. So when I got it open, there was Pat with just his head and his arms sticking out of all the clothes and stuff. He was going, it's just like, what happened? And Mark had like a lot of broken bones and cuts, and his face, hands, arms, legs, ribs, the whole thing. And they had to cut Mark out of the bus. He was, he told me that, this is a personal thing for him. But I don't think he would mind it. He had a sister that had gone on, and he said that he was freaking out, and his sister came to him while he was sitting there in the seat and said, I know this is scary, but it's going to be okay. So just try to relax. Wow. And he calmed down. He stopped screaming, basically, because he had been yelling the whole time up to that point. And that's what he said. He said, my sister came and told me I was going to be all right.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How beautiful.
Yeah. But that, after that, we looked like Night of the Living Dead outside walking around, like everybody's all skinned. But that's what happened. We came over a hill and we couldn't stop.
I know, and I know you left the band then for a bunch of reasons, but how did the bus accident lead to the decision to leave the band?
Up until that point, the band had took off, and up to that point, it had just taken off like a rocket. And I said before, I didn't really have any goals. I just got to feeling like, okay, here I am. I'm in my 20s. And I've done all of this stuff that I never thought I would ever do. And the only thing I wanted to do when I moved to town was to be able to play well enough to be invited to come out and play gigs. And that happened. So I was satisfied. And then BB came along and just got swept up in it. I thought I had done more than I could ever dream of doing. And I thought probably it was a good time to go and get a legitimate career while I still had the time to learn how to do something well.
But that's not because of the bus crash. The bus crash doesn't make you reconsider your life or anything like that? No,
it didn't make me reconsider my life. I had already been thinking about possibly doing something else because I was satisfied that had been a dream that came true. But that was what capped it off. It's like, okay, well, I could have been hurt a lot worse than this, and I think probably it's time to stop.
So you go to upstate New York, and you're working as a contractor. You're working as a cottage
caretaker. Working for an elderly couple that had some property in the Catskills, and I worked at a ski lift, driving a shuttle in the wintertime.
Were you playing?
I quit.
Quit playing the instrument.
I quit playing. Didn't play much of anything at all, and got moved to the Catskills, and I couldn't really find anybody around to play much with, and so I just didn't play. Every time I'd get the hankering I wanted to play, I'd get it out, and I couldn't play, or my skills were dropping off, and so I played less and less and less, and consequently, but took up drinking way too much because I was miserable, and I wasn't fit to be around, really. There wasn't a lot of things to do, and I didn't know many people way up there. It's a beautiful part of the country, and it was a shame that I was loaded for most of it. But but that showed me that playing music was a big part of who I had become, and that I was not going to be able to ignore it unless I wanted to not be fit to be around. And so I started slowly getting back into it.
Man, oh man, I can only imagine that. When you're not playing music, you think you want to stop, and you stop playing music, and then you just lose that part of you. And you wouldn't be the first person to tell me that then gets replaced by drinking or some kind of bad act. You wouldn't be the first to.
Well, I did all of that, and that lasted on on through part of the time whenever I got back to Nashville. By the time I moved back to town, there was nothing really much left to do, because there were different youthful faces that had joined the crowd that were exceptional players, and McCurry's being one.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Ronnie's always positive and you know, energetic, plays well, sings well, good looks, friendly, you know, and I started playing with Greer quite a bit at that point in time, but there wasn't much to do on mandolins because all the young bucks had moved to town, and I was, you know, it's like, oh God, I just threw it all away. But it was just a turn in the road.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happens. I mean, then you get to let's just skip ahead a little bit, because I love the Greer stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about Hartford. And Hartford would have been, I mean, I knew the Nashville Bluegrass Band, but I knew you from the Hartford stuff, that Hartford string band stuff, the work you guys did together. Like, because Hartford had done the liner notes for one of the early Nashville Bluegrass Band records, I think. So does he call you then when you go back to Nashville and say, like, hey man, like you're playing the real thing, you're playing the heart, you know, want to do it?
He had been around some at jam sessions and what have you.
I heard a story that he told you, like, you got to be solo. You got to be solo. The only way to do this is to do solo. And then he invited you to be in his band.
Yeah, I went up. There was a thing going on around Knoxville in a town called Norris, where it's sort of homecoming days. There was a guy up there that had a collection. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, he collected a bunch of Appalachian like tools and all kinds of stuff, cabins, and they had Tennessee homecoming days. John would play up there every year, and I went up there to sort of hang out and have something to do, and met John, and we started playing some a little bit, and it seemed like that went on for a couple of different years. And he told me every time we would sit down and play how much he enjoyed being a solo act. And I guess about a month after the second year of that, he asked me to join him and start going on the road. And I thought, well, what about all this solo thing that you were talking to me about? But so we did that, and then there was a bass player involved, several different ones, and occasionally Bob Carlin would come on and play in banjo, and then Chris Sharp was in the mix, and you know, and on and on and on.
Man, there's so much space. Like, I had one of my favorite recordings from that. You guys did that Live at Mountain Stage record, and you guys do Bring Your Clothes On Home and Love Me One More Time. And John's playing fiddle. Who's playing bass on that? Who would have been?
Jerry McCurry.
Yeah, Jerry. And you're playing mandolin. There's no guitar.
Nope.
And you have all this room, and you're playing. Mm-hmm. You're playing beautifully on that. Like, that's a great recording.
Working with, well, a lot of people that went on and on and on about that thing a long time before I ever heard it. I couldn't tell you right now what's even on it, except that I know it's a gig. I remember doing the gig. Playing with Greer was, you know, a big ingredient. And that too, trying to figure out what to do with the mandolin when a virtuoso guitar player is playing, and I'm left to be the guy playing rhythm for him.
Yeah, and you can't just go chop chop chop.
No, I did that about once, and I thought, well, there's no support here, none. So what can I do with this little sissy guitar? You know, and Hartford was so into Ed Haley, whose wife Ella played mandolin with him. I just started going blang, 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 blang. I'm trying to, at first doing something, I felt like it was something that I had tried to not do the entire time I was learning how to play. And then this was what John wanted, was this old time stuff. And so, I got into that more and more and more, and then started meeting some of the legit old time players, the people that were really in love with this music, and realizing that I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. That the skill level for playing a lot of the old time stuff was way up there, and that there were some magnificent technicians that were doing it, and I was way behind. So that was at the point where I started hanging with Molsky and Rafe Stefanini and all of those folks, Carlin quite a bit.
Yeah. But that's getting to the heart of the first music you started playing. I mean, that's going back, right? Like that's going back to those early days you were telling me.
Yeah, it was. And then all of a sudden Armored Smith showed back up. I started, I remember hearing about these guys from the guys I was working with when I was 15.
Yeah. But it's that heart of the music. I mean, that's how I started. I mean, when I started playing Irish music and I started playing old time music, and I was already a wild bluegrass obsessed guy, even though I was playing Irish music. But there's, going back to what you were saying at the beginning about finding the heart and the rawness and the depth of this music, you find that in that music, and you can hear that,
And it's extremely difficult to figure out what to do with a mandolin if you're not one of the Leake County revelers.
Yeah.
You don't know what am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
So I took a bunch of ingredients and made something up just to try to fill space and be a legitimate backup guy for all this stuff. And John said that he didn't care what we did as long as we played something that pertained to what's being played. I mean, that's the way he said it. He said, be musical, be creative, do whatever you want. Just make sure that it pertains to what I'm playing.
Wow. I got so many. I mean, I want to be conscious of your time, and you've been really generous already. I just got a couple more things I'm dying to know. One is that, Hartford I find really, really interesting. Really formative artist for me, especially. I wore a bowler cap to my grade 12 graduation because of him. I'm from a sort of a nautical world, and I was like, maybe are there riverboats here? And they were like, no, this is the Atlantic Ocean, Tom. There's no riverboat. But here's what I'm curious about, and I don't know if you'll have an answer, but when he has that success with Gentle on My Mind in the early days, right? He doesn't really have to worry about a lot after that.
And it's knowing I'm not shackled by forgotten words and bonds and the ink stains that are dried upon some line. That keeps you in the back roads by the rivers of my memory. It keeps you ever gentle on my mind. It's not clinging to the rocks and ivy planted on...
He just financially, he used to refer to it as mailbox money. He had mailbox money coming in. And in those days, the success of those songs, if you wrote a Wichita Lineman or you wrote a Gentle on My Mind, it was amazing. How much did that lead to who he became as an artist? How much did that, when you were touring with him, his fearlessness, his idiosyncrasies, what he was able to do as an artist, which was outside pretty much everything else. Where did that come from in him? Did it come from the freedom he was afforded through Gentle on My Mind, or was it kind of there anyway?
That was part of it. He did all kinds of stuff. He did whatever came to mind. He told me at one point that he used to write 7 or 8 songs a day when he was doing the Radio John thing. And it's just, he was that sort of an obsessed personality. Everything he did, one of his mottos was, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. So, that's who he was. He earned every inch of it. I mean, he was just, and he called himself a frustrated librarian, and not nearly as much as a musician. He looked upon himself as a guy that probably would be better suited to work in a library and doing filing and all that kinds of stuff. But he did say that he wouldn't let anybody mess with Gentle on My Mind. He called it Gentle. He said, that's my money song. And he said, you don't mess with that. Because that made it possible for me to do all the rest of this stuff.
I dip my cup of soup back from the gurgling, crackling cauldron in some train yard. My beard a roughened in coal pile and a dirty hat pulled low across my face. Through cupped hands round a tin can, I pretend to hold you to my breast and find that you're waving from the back roads by the rivers of my memory. For hours you're just gentle on my mind.
So he was very much aware that that's what put him in a place where he just followed what was occurring to him. I think he worked and worked and worked at. A real interesting process. It took me a long time to figure out how fearless he had been and how courageous he was to do what he had been doing, which was just go out there and be himself. And just the whole process of working through stuff, he would work through them and get something together. He thought how he wanted it, and he'd put it out in front of the audience. And if it was going good, then it would stay on the list. If not, he would rework it and see and mess around with it and see how it was coming across. And arrangements a lot of times just fall by the wayside. If it wasn't working at that point, he'd just do something else.
And he was doing all this while he was sick.
Yeah. There got to be a point where, before he was sick too, but it got to be a point where if he sat still for any length of time, he'd doze off.
Yeah.
And once there was time to play music, you could hardly keep up with him. I will remember distinctly a night standing on the stage with him where he was playing, and the thought went through my mind, my God, this guy is old as my daddy, and it's all I can do just to stay on top of it and keep up.
Yeah. I found out about him through those Down from the Mountain concerts you guys did.
Mm-hmm.
Those were, just everything you're talking about. I mean, if you just look at the trajectory here of you're starting out at Meridian, and then, the meeting Monroe, and then the Nashville Bluegrass Band stuff takes off and it blows up. And then, the bus crash, you fall in some hard times, and then you come back and you're feeling a little bit left out. And then you go on to be the mandolin player on the biggest recording in the history of the music. Like you become one of the mandolin players, one of the architects of the Oh Brother thing, which becomes the biggest thing.
I am the man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my day.
The Cohen brothers hired John to come in and do some fiddle tunes because they were fans of his. I mean, John just went with whatever was, I don't know that I remember him talking about following because it was popular and making that his own. John just did John. And whatever kind of idea, some of the stuff that we did was wacky to a lot of people, but John had a lot of fans. He back whenever John was doing a lot of songs about smoking pot, he called them his lifestyle reinforcement songs. He had a lot of fans that just used to scream, "What, Granny, won't you smoke some?" And he'd say that he would do that later, but he got into that Ed Haley thing. And he basically did what he called buying back the territory.
One more thing that I never will know, lost in the speed of the old longbow. Down a little down, oh, never can catch that certain song at Catlettsburg on the courthouse lawn.
He would always do Gentle on My Mind because that's what everybody knew him for. But then he would go out and he'd say, I'll do a song that they like, and then I'll do another one that I'm pretty sure they like, and then I'll do one for me, and then I'll do one for them, and that we both like, and then maybe I'll do 2 or 3 more for them, and then I'll do a couple for us. And he was just like, all this was running in his mind while he was doing it. He didn't show up with a set list. The set list was in his mind, and if something would occur, he might decide all of a sudden he's going to do, okay, there's people here that want to hear Tall Buildings. So he'd pick up the guitar, he'd borrow Chris's guitar, and he'd do that pretty much, and we'd just kind of noodle around in the background.
Send me to work in tall buildings. So it's goodbye to the sunshine, goodbye to the dew, goodbye to the flowers, and goodbye to you. I'm off to the subway. I must not be late. I'm going to work in tall buildings.
The whole band experience with him was about paying attention and listening to what everybody was doing, because you didn't never know. He'd put some microphone, if they didn't have mics down low, he'd put about 3 or 4 microphones in a group, what he called a bouquet, like that. And he'd be up playing, and he'd say, Chris, play one, and here we go. It's like, oh, really? My turn? So you have to pay attention. I mean, it was good for that, because you have to be on the ball all the time. It may have come across as being something that looked kind of informal, but it was anything but, because if you weren't watching him, you'd be sorry.
Yeah.
He'd catch you off guard, and then he'd make you standing there with your britches down.
Yeah. But man, oh man, that old brother thing took off. Like, that took off.
Yeah, nobody had any idea, including the record companies, that was going to happen. Whenever it all got done, we went in to do fiddle tunes, and we ended up cutting about 35 or 36 of them. And the Coens liked what John was doing, so they just kept us on. And and then that whole thing started, and it just got to be a whirlwind. Sometime Emmy Lou would come in and do some with her, and Gillian and would come on and do some stuff, and then Tominski's over here, Cox family's back there, and Ralph's hanging back there, going, looking at his watch and doing all that kind of stuff. And it was like, well, go over here and play with Norman on this one, and then we'll do okay, then let's go over here and let's do You Are My Sunshine.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
And there's like hours and hours and hours of that music still in the can. I once in a while, I do about 1 or 2 projects for T-Bone every year since.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'll say, well, we've just remixed such and such off of that soundtrack.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still messing with that thing.
Yeah, I had he came on my show not that long ago, and we had a nice talk about that, and he let me know that, because he knows how transformative that was for me. Like, if it wasn't for Oh Brother, I wouldn't have found out about my own province's music.
I saw a lot of new pairs of overalls that year.
But you know what I mean? Like, if it wasn't for Oh Brother, I wouldn't have learned about my own music. I wouldn't have learned about the music from my hometown. Like,
I know, but it was all old music.
Yeah,
it was, except for the Pete Kuykendall wrote some of those songs on that soundtrack. I mean, but he had written those a while back. Most of that stuff that we all played was music that our grandparents knew.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a testament to the strength of it. And the guy at the record label, whenever he came out and handed out all the gold records, he said, nobody had any idea that this music was still popular. He said, we couldn't have seen this coming for anything.
I think it tells you something, man. As someone who thinks a lot about flash versus heart, and it's been on my mind, like, I think when you play heartfelt music, no matter when it's from, it can reach people on a massive level.
That was the common consensus is that people were looking for something real, and there it was.
Yeah. Your break on the opening of I'll Fly Away on that is really nice too, man. I play that a lot.
Oh, geez. They wrote it out wrong in the songbook. Somebody, apparently whoever wrote the tab for it didn't realize that mandolins have chords on them. So he was going up and down the fingerboard this way. But I have had more comments, not necessarily compliments, but comments on that than anything I've ever done.
The opening, the kickoff to I'll Fly Away?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
It's easy. I tell you, it could be because it's easy to figure out, and you sound really impressive when you figure it out. Like
T-Bone said, just play it simple and just play it. They were listening to the Cackle Sisters, I think it was what it was, and it was just me and Chris playing. He said, "Well, just play it real simple, play it straightforward," and we did it over and over and over until the groove got just right.
Can you pick a little bit of it? Could you get the mandolin there? Can you just pick a little bit of it? Do you mind? Do you mind?
No. It's all Monroe.
That's so good, man. Thank you for doing that.
It's just, I hadn't played mandolin today so far, so I hope that was all right.
And that leads me to this. I mean, if you think about it, and I want to be cautious of time here, maybe close things off like this. I mean, that leads me back to this new Monroe record. I mean, this record of rare and fine. These it's hard to think about what to call it, like unreleased, unheard, sometimes unfinished music of Bill Monroe. So I got a couple of questions on that. One off is, what keeps you coming back to Bill Monroe's mandolin playing? What keeps you coming back to it?
Well, at this point in time, it's something that's real familiar to me, and it's a comfort. And not so much an obsession, but just I've transcribed about several, 300 or 400 of his recorded works, and it's a vocabulary that I'm familiar with all of its quirks. We're talking about it being unapologetic. It's the honesty in it that I lean on, and the language is flexible. There's a lot of things that you can do to it. Mark Hembry said one time when I was agonizing about something, he said, just play the language because it works everywhere. It does. And it fits because it's something that is familiar to me and something that I feel like I understand. Whether I can always pull it off or not, it's a familiar, comfortable place to be, and that's what draws me into it. Plus, it's just the kind of notes that he played and what he was striving, in his own way to be a fiddle player with an instrument that had frets on it. It keeps revealing itself to me in different ways, and that excites me, more than it used to when I was trying to figure out what a lot of it was about. Every time I sit down and listen to it, I hear something a little bit different that escaped me the first time. So it's not as if, or the first 1,000 times. So it's not something that I feel like I'm rediscovering a lot of it. It keeps coming around as being new.
This was somebody who, in the early days of bluegrass music, didn't like that the Stanleys existed because they sounded like him, that he didn't like that there were other bluegrass bands at all, or bluegrass style bands.
Yeah, Flatt and Scruggs were, the ones that were really making the strides, and they were the most popular. And I think Bill was real jealous of them. But in the beginning, what they started together was the thing that really took off.
What did he think about a young fellow like you playing his style? Like, what did you trying to learn it?
He didn't tell me much of anything at first, and I felt I wanted for him to say, yeah, you're trying to play my style, and to show me some stuff. And I in my insecure way, I just closed myself off from him and decided that I was just going to figure it out my own way, and whether he wanted to tell me or not. But after I got to the point where I had learned more of it, at one point he just thought, well, okay, I guess I can have a conversation with this guy now that he's picked up some more of it, so you understand what I'm talking about. Bill had a funny way of explaining what it is he was doing, and it was always about reading in between the lines. He finally came around. He was coming up to a mutual friend of ours' house, and I was standing out on the porch smoking a cigarette, as I did back in those days, and Bill came walking up the driveway by himself, and I just stuck my hand up and waved, and he said, "Seems like you'd come down here and shake a man's hand." And so I walked all the way across the yard and went over there and met him and shook hands with him, and we were walking down the driveway, and he said it seems like you're really playing this music right now. And I thought, wow, okay. He didn't say my music.
That must have meant so much to you, man.
It was like winning Wimbledon or something. I just thought, okay, geez. I just kind of walked along there with my head exploding, trying to think, well, oh God, now what am I going to do? Well, you mean I've arrived? Is that I've got a an affirmation from the Father? Yeah, it's just like, okay, God, wow. Now what do I do?
Were you guys still in touch when he passed?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I used to go out and do some stuff around out there for him. I plowing his garden up every once in a while and doing little things. But I didn't do any post holes like some of those other boys did.
Yeah,
I would take him to town every once in a while, but I was just sort of a casual friendship. Once in a while, he'd call and say he wanted to go to the station inn. Ralph or Pete Rowan or somebody was down there playing, and I'd just drive him to town. But I was happy to do it. I mean, if that's all, and Julia and I are about the same age, and she would really pushed him to communicate with me, which I appreciated and appreciate to this day.
What do you think he would think about this record you just put out of his music?
I think he would love it, because this is a bunch. He would certainly approve that. I mean, I didn't try to do anything except make a fiddle record after the fashion that he would have done it. Now, this is stuff that was just sort of informal tapes, a lot of it, and things that were just rambling around in his head that came out onto a cassette tape someplace and is floating around on the internet. Some of it, not even that much, just were off of radio tapes. But it's all his music, and there's about another album's worth of it still around. But after that, I there's not really much left.
I'll probably play a little bit of Trail of Tears after this is over.
Isn't that a pretty thing?
Oh my God. I mean,
good Lord.
Such an evocative, sad, tragic name on it too, it's hard not to think. It's just a powerful piece of music, man.
Yeah, and that California Forest Fire is a nice one. The title of it was a little bit nonsensical, but there's on the tape, it seemed like Tom Ewan gave me this tape that had it on it. Was just dressing room stuff. Bill was noodling on some things, and then it seemed like the longer he played it, the more it came apart. And then there was another piece, that third part that kind of came in, and it sounded like it went with the rest of it. And after that, it disintegrated. But there was enough of it there that I could tell that what that statement was. Yeah. And so it's like, no, don't let this get away.
Well, I gotta tell you, man, like just hearing the whole story and hearing kind of how it's come around full circle and just I've always been a great admirer of your playing and the heart of your playing and the love I can feel in your playing and there's trying to access something deeper than virtuosity and something deeper than just chops. You know what I mean? It's always meant an awful lot to me. Thanks for making the time today. I appreciate it.
No, it's fine. I'm still discovering it and just I love to do it probably more now than I ever have. it's been such a huge part of my life. You know, what else am I going to do? It means a lot. It means the world to me. Now that I've gotten to be double sixes, it's a lot of things don't mean a whole lot to me that used to, because it was all just bullshit. But you know, this is real stuff, and that's what I'm clinging to now, because that's the important stuff to me.
Thanks for making the time, Mike.
You're absolutely welcome.
All right, thank you so much to Mike. What a joy it was getting to talk to him, especially opening up about that. Just everything that happened after that bus accident. And I wasn't prepared for that, but I was really grateful to Mike for being so open there about his life in the music. Thank you so much for listening. Toy Heart is produced by Stephanie Coleman and me, Tom Power. Our executive producer is Amy Reitnauer Jacobs, with help, as always, from the entire BGS team. Creative director Shelby Williamson, editor Chris Jacobs. Chris Jacobs is also one of the folks behind this podcast. Managing editor Justin Hiltner, all of the writers and contributors that make BGS the best source for roots culture redefined. Discover more at thebluegrasssituation.com. Our theme song, Toy Heart by Bill Monroe, Big Mon, was performed by Chris Eldridge and Kristen Andreasen. Stay tuned for more new episodes coming up this season with the likes of Lori Lewis, Jody Stecker, and Alison Krauss. If this is the first time you've ever heard us, you can hear full interviews with the likes of Jerry Douglas, Del McCurry, Allison Brown, and Bela Fleck, wherever you got this podcast. And if you like the show, please share it with a friend who loves bluegrass music. Stay tuned for so much more coming up on this season of Toy Heart. We'll see you soon. Later on.
Hey everyone, Ed Helms here. You might know me as Andy from The Office or Stu from The Hangover, or you might know me as the co-founder of BGS. I know, I'm just as surprised as you they let me co-found something. But here's the thing, we're doing it again. Yeah, this time we're leaping into our other deep love, the vast and vibrant world of country music, with something we're calling Good Country. Now this isn't just another newsletter. Think of Good Country as a place. A place where you can explore, learn, and dig into all of what makes country good. Seriously, country music has so much going on these days, and it's coming from so many different deep and soulful places, and we're here to cover all of it, just as we've done for bluegrass and roots music at BGS for over a decade. So sign up now at goodcountrybgs.substack.com and let us bring you the many sides of country music straight to your inbox. Good Country. It's a nice place to be.